Hello and welcome to Ideas for with Diana on April 13th, 2022. Well, for this segment and show, I'd like to talk about three things. First is some research that I've done on the coming food insecurity. With the coming food insecurity, this is based on some resources from programs that I've found from Worldwide News. As a note, please note some of these programs you may not be able to watch on YouTube or in other areas, and you may only be able to watch on the website that they specify on their program. Two programs were from RT. One program is called Renegade by Ashcroft, and what happens this week? He had a guest from the British Farmers Union agricultural analyst who was talking about how England is a net importer of food and and the food crises that England would have and that the world will have soon. Well, just to give you an example, yesterday I was shopping with a friend and we went out to the grocery store and I just needed to pick up a few things, milk, orange juice, bread, just some stuff to make sandwiches. And a friend of mine was with me, and she said, "Oh, whoops, I forgot to get the eggs." So we go down and go to the eggs, and what happens, normally when you go down and get eggs, it's nothing really to talk about because what do? You go down and get some eggs, put in the cart, shop, go home. Well, first there's two things. The eggs have gone up, just like in England where eggs are two two $2.50 a pound for 12. In the United States, it's 250 250 in US dollars for 12. However, that was one shock. The second shock, a friend of mine looked, where are the eggs? We're in the right section. Where's the eggs? Oh. And what happens? The egg section was huge, super huge. We looked high and low. We saw some broken eggs that are left over, and even people were willing to buy broken eggs packages because it had all been picked over, everything. And for me, this is an amazing thing. I'm near 60, and in the United States, this is one of the few times I I I sort of observed anything like this, but this is the first time I observed a whole section. We were at a super Walmart, and you know how big the egg sections are, and everything was empty. Almost everything was picked. So a friend of mine ended up picking up a package that wasn't as damaged as much to buy like that though. And even like when I went to other sections of Walmart, I went to get some items. I looked, nope, empty, empty, empty. And another store I go to, Piggly Wiggly. And the thing is, this reminds me something of what I used to hear propaganda about in the 70s, like when the Soviet Union was collapsing. People had money to buy things, but basically there's nothing in stock. And well, it looks like we're facing it over here, plus higher prices like they did over there. And the whole thing about this is there's on Ashcroft's show, which it's gonna be. I'm just gonna switch over here so you can see it. On Ashcroft's show, his show was on food insecurity, and it talked about basically what we can do about it. I'm gonna add this. I'm gonna add this to the live stream. So we'll just add this here. Now, again, please note you may get a funny message saying that this is from RT, and so um, it's up to it's up to you. If you want to watch it, you watch it. If you don't, you don't. But my parents always encouraged my sister and I to read banned books. So when I think about this thing about banning certain media, it reminds me of Fahrenheit 451. You could read certain books, but actually not books, but you could only read comic books because books were burned. And the reason for 451 is because that's the temperature at which paper burns. when Ray Bradbury wrote the story. Excuse me. And it so reminds me today, like for example, you can't get RT in other places, but when I watch Renegade and I watch Going Underground, I don't feel like I'm listening to the voices of the Kremlin or stuff. I feel that I'm listening to British journalists who are giving a perspective from London, as both shows are made in London. Now the second show that I want to mention about this show mentions about um, how by sanctioning Russia, we have sanctioned ourselves. And let me put that. Um, now called sanction boomerang. And I'll put that in the comments as well. And when you look at this, um, it is interesting though. When I watch both these programs, what happens? They had to move. They had to change the locations because these programs were produced in England using the resources of another network that's prominent in England and Europe, and they try to help out as much as they can. But they had to switch over to something else. But when I do listen to these programs, I don't feel like I'm listening to the voice of Kremlin, like saying "down with the capitalist pigs" and of the old '70s. It's actually a discussion of ideas. It's like basically William F. Buckley. William F. Buckley was a conservative, and he hosted Fight Wing Line for many years as Margaret Hoover has continued the tradition. And Margaret Hoover is the great granddaughter of President Herbert Hoover, who was much maligned by certain radical fringes like that. And what happens when people really study the history of President Hoover, they're beginning to realize that he's not the evil person that was made out to be during that time during the election. He actually started the national building program, building dams and roads, which was later co-opted by the Democratic Party as basically the New Deal. And also, what happened was he was responsible after the war for getting the United States back on a commerce and trade footing again after the war and ending rationing after World War II. Because even in this, going back to food insecurity, and Ross Ashcroft in his program with this guest, I'm sorry, I wish my memory for names was better, but his guest agreed to give a great discussion. Talked about how England had to go into food rationing up to 1954. They had these ration books and these ration stamps. Many people, if you're not sure, that ask your grandparents or something, they'll be able to tell you about it. But the thing is, what happens? People had to have these ration books. They had to buy food and stuff. And the thing is, England had to do that because basically they still were recovering from World War II. And even like my dad remembers like when we used to rent apartments in Kenosha. Some people think, oh, that's great. Let's have rent control for apartments. We'll all have good apartments. Not quite. For those who study apartments, it's actually more expensive to rent an apartment in Boston than it is in New York because of rent control. Because in Boston, each time a new rent control building is built, it has to be built to maintain a certain level for life of the building that they can still make a profit. So then when a new building is built, they have to build it at a higher level of rent control. And then when the next one's built, you see where this is going, very high escalating. Instead of letting the value float according to what the market can pay in a fair value under a fair trade system. So that's why many people find out it's actually cheaper to live in New York, and you can live better in New York than you can in Boston. To those in Boston, I've been to Boston many times. I like the city, but facts are facts, and so I'm not. I have been to the Oyster House on Union Street, but I did hear from a few friends during COVID that the Oyster House is closed. So next time in Boston, um, let me know what's a good place to go to in addition to the Oyster House, because I always love their chowder, and I remember having a real Boston cream pie. But getting back to food insecurity, okay, food insecurity is this: you're only going to buy so much food. For example, let's say you go to the store, and let's say this represents your groceries. You're only going to buy so much food. You're not going to buy any more, any less, unless you really are starving, unless you're like you haven't had a meal or anything else. And in England, they even talked about how basically one discussion is England's 4 meals away from anarchy. That's how tight the supply system is. And I'm sure United States, I'm sure we're not far behind, or we may be hand in hand. So so but what happens, you buy the same quantity of food. Okay, so you buy the same quantity of food, and what happens basically, okay, you go to the grocer and your bill is this much. All right, now what happens is what happens when there's what happens when there's too much food produced. Okay, well, your bill goes down, and everyone says, oh great, this is great, we're happy. Now, okay, let's consider the farmer side of this. Okay, food prices go down. Okay, this is how much the farmer gets, but this is how much it costs the farmer to make the food. So eventually the farmer says, okay, well, what can I do? Do I expand my farm? Do I try to focus on one item? Do I get out of the business? And that's one issue of food insecurity, because basically right now the cost of fertilizer is mentioned in last Ask Cost program by its guest speaker. Again, I'm sorry, I have trouble remembering names right away, but he's a wonderful speaker. And just as a shout out to the people who produce Renegade, what I think would help if basically if the speaker that Lost Ask Coffee on show would meet the farm speaker that does the news farm reports for WBBM radio in Chicago, because I think if the two of them would join together and do like a sort of like a UK US farm broadcast for many of us who are non-farmers to explain what's going on, why our grocery bills, I think it help many of us. Just as a shout out. But what happens now? Let's say there's not enough food produced. Okay, let's say there's a shortage of food. Let's say someone misses the target by 5%. Okay, well, this is your food bill when enough food is produced. When food isn't, when just 5%, your food bill goes like this. Let's say someone misses the target by 20%. Well, I gotta move this down here. Your food bill is going to go up to here. Your food bill is going to double. Well, what happens? Your salary hasn't doubled. Your taxes haven't decreased. So what will happen is eventually some people may have to make a decision on buying food or paying for utilities or paying for gas, like many people had to do during World War II. And also, we could face an economic crash like we did in the 2008 depression crash that we had, when the housing market and the bond market called, even though they called it a great recession, really it was a depression, because a recession is based upon a downtick of sales. However, there's not a devaluation of goods and services or currency. But in the quote recession of 2008, there was a devaluation of the dollar and other things, and we had to do what's called quantitative easing, which means that basically we don't have enough people. The money's not going far enough. So what do? Since the United States is a reserve currency, we just ask the Federal Reserve to print more money. So then we print more money, we give the people more money. People think, oh, great, I got more money, I can buy more goods and services. But then when you actually consider how much this money is really worth compared to 10 years ago, the stack of money right here is, let's say this is the money now. Let's compare the stack of money to 20 years ago as a pop. Okay, this is about 15 sheets of paper. This is 3 sheets of paper, in U.S. currency. So, and the way you can verify that this is, consider this. in the early 1980s, when I was in pre-med, I used to go golfing with a friend, and we'd go up to Johnson's Park, and we seen Pedophine Springs and other places. And like, let's say going out to Bindale. Well, we'd spend $4 in gas round trip to go out to Bindale, and each of us would drive our own cars. And then we go and play golf. We'd pay about $4 for 18 holes for golf. And then after golf, I would have a molten milk. So that was like about $2.50. So I paid $10.50 for golfing. Okay. Now in 1980 dollars compared to 2022 dollars, that's $42. Well, in 1980, I didn't think twice about spending $10.50 when I did an activity. But nowadays when I do an activity, $42.50, wow, that's quite a bit. I have to think about that. How that money goes, even though it's the same money. And what I mean by money is that it's the same amount of money that would be backed by gold and silver, not a fiat currency. But so when we hear food prices dip, on a food supply, prices go, people are going to have to wonder what's going to happen. And with farmers, give an example, fertilizer now is in England 1,200 1,200 pounds a ton for fertilizer in England compared to normally 220 pounds a ton in the spring. So what happens, let's say someone's raising meat or having cows like that. Okay, so you think, okay, well, that's a lot, and it is, because by the time they get the milk from the cow, or they send the cow process the cow for the markets for people to eat steaks or something else, that cow or steer is sold for basically, like the one that commentator said, 220 pence a head. However, it costs 280 pence for them to get their cow or steer prepared for market. So they're losing 60 pence a head. So if we take out the calculator and we take 220 divided by 60 divided by 220, we come out to basically it's a loss of about 28%. Just to put it in family terms, let's say someone gets a gross pay of $3,000 a month in the United States. Okay, and say you had 28% drop in income. All right, that's $840. Do you think many people would be able to eat that? And if they couldn't put on the credit cards or couldn't add to the credit card debt? No, when a net negative savings rate. That's why this thing about what's going on with the war in Ukraine, we got to find a better way to get this resolved, because as this goes on, this is gonna impact the world greatly, and this is going to impact the people of Ukraine greater, because the world looks to Ukraine, as well as Belarus and Russia, as the world's breadbasket for grain, fertilizer, other products that we rely on each day, but we really don't think about in that. Now, the second point I wanted to get into is basically this is the second program I put on the link about basically the New World Paradigm. Now, in the New World Paradigm, it talks about by sanctioning Russia, we sanction itself. Well, what does that mean? Well, take an example. Like, for example, when we did sanction Russia, first, basically, the ruble was like this to the dollar. And then as you sanctioned the ruble, well, let me do it the other way. The ruble was like this. And the ruble started to lose value. But then what happened, once people started to realize, well, Russia will accept payments in ruble or yuan, then the ruble came back like this. So what has happened? Well, essentially two things have happened. We've now, instead of having one international monetary system where the dollar is reserve currency, which means for people in the United States and with government planning, it means that it's easier for us in the United States to run a deficit than for other countries, since we're a world reserve currency. That makes it that stuff helps us out a little bit. It also helps the world because we're supposed to spread the wealth around the world. But now that basically we have two like international monetary funds. We have one SWIFT system, and we have one. Um, we'll call it the YRF YRIF system, one global funds transfer system. That means that basically all the money that was going reserve currency is going to the dollar. Now part of it's going over here. So basically, this pot becomes a little small, makes it harder. This pot goes a little bigger. And once people countries worldwide figure out, well, we the two sides of the street now, they're going to choose whichever side of the street is easiest to deal with. And that's part of the reason why some countries have decided to do the transactions in yuan, and even some South American countries have had their currencies backed up by China in yuan, as in Argentina and other South American countries. Now, what does that mean for basically the post Cold War world paradigm as we knew it? Well, in the original post Cold War paradigm, Russia was supposed to be made equal with the G7 nations. And for example, one time it was allowed to be a member of the G8, and part of that thing is basically there was a thing about that we respect countries' freedoms, but we also realize that we don't want to cause tension that was going to reignite like an east-west line. Um, and for a while, this worked. I mean, basically, until the late '90s, it was working. And I think even up to '98. But then things started to change, and other things started to change, and by the time when I realized what was going on, when I was watching in November, I thought, well, God, why in the world did it change? What caused the attitude? Because in the early '90s, I remember basically how many scientific colleagues in Russia were glad to have the old east-west line diminished, because it meant that basically there was trade, people could get things, even scientists could participate in things, and that was the happiest day when basically as President, Associate Vice President of Emergency Management for Society for Computer Simulation, when we started to have colleagues from St. Petersburg and Academy of Science in Russia come over, present papers, do talks, and we talked as colleagues. We met at the bar, we talked over some beer, and we did other things, and it was great. And what happened was, as like I felt, and even my European colleagues felt, finally, we don't have to live on the duck and cover. We don't have to live under the threat of a nuclear bomb. We don't have to live a threat on the nuclear war like was discussed by the song Nina. Now let me just see if I can find that for you. Just a minute, because even when during that period there was a song by Nina called "99 Red Balloons." Now let me put that as a link. Let me just see if we can pull this up here. Um, and see. There we go. I found it. Okay. And I'll put this in here too. Now, what her song was about was it came on 1983 and talked about how things were so balanced and counterbalanced that this one little thing could cause this whole thing like a big thing. And she mentioned the example of a lead balloon being misclassified as a missile attack. And the thing is, it had a wide impact because I live in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin basically we sort of became this sort of unorthodox state in the country by voting to be a nuclear-free zone. Of course, at that time, President Reagan didn't like us, but even Republicans in Wisconsin voted to be a nuclear-free zone, which shows you just how much support there was in that, though. And the thing is, even Wisconsin, when you look at the thing at Animal House with this double secret probation, and when we think about the double secret probation of Animal House, it does remind me again of basically the media limiting like that, though, because what happens is basically is people think, well, oh, um, it's gonna be, it's gonna be basically, people think, oh, there's nothing wrong with limiting what people see because we're doing it for their own good. And that though, you know, and Animal House was literally filmed on the campus of Madison. In that though, and what happened was it had a big effect because even today, when people go to meetings and they feel that they're being that they're not being listened to or they're being prevented from speaking, they'll use the double secret probation clip from Animal House to where basically and then as they walk out they'll say la 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 la, sort of in a very comedic way to sort of let them know that they're the Americans and the committee that's holding them back are not Americans and not following freedom. So this is the reason why I'm glad that there's still some ways to get alternative news. And even in college, I used to read Paris Match, Der Spiegel, The Guardian, Independent. Let's see what else. And quite a few other international journals from the library. And that was the nice thing about Parkside's libraries. And also what happened was I had better language faculties where I could read French and German better than I can today. Um, and the thing is with um, with the news and limitation, when you listen to news nowadays, the days of Walter Cronkite, David Brinkley, David Huntley, and other famed journalists, they're gone. They're gone. Everything is a bias. And even when I give this program, I mean, people may assume that I may have a bias too, but my bias is that I believe in sharing information, even if it's objectionable. Because what happens is basically, long as someone doesn't say that they want to do any type of outright destruction, then I'll share it. But basically, and also when people start to label things for me, say, well, oh, this is a mouthpiece of such and such, and you shouldn't read this, or even like I'll run into some people, atheists, to say, well, you're LGBT, you really shouldn't be a Christian because you're LGBT, you're going to have the Christians come after you. Well, no, I respect your right to be an atheist, but please respect my right to be a Christian. And also, I have met many Christian people, some of them who've been called the enemy, some basically. And what happens when I met Christians who are evangelical or other faiths, actually, when we did talk with our own thoughts, we had a lot to share. We had a lot in common. We had a lot to share, and even those who some think, well, evangelicals don't like LGBT. Actually, many do. It's just that the thing is what has to be done basically is when someone talks to someone, they have to say, well, here's a simple question: why are you LGBTQ? Okay, now if they can answer that in their own words, many people who are Christian will say, fine, okay, we realize it's your decision and you're living your true life. But if someone's going to come up and take a talking point like this, I'm LGBTQ because the Republicans have done that, and what they're going to say is, okay, you're a robot. Are you sure you're not being duped? Are you sure you're not being manipulated? Are you sure that basically that someone is not forcing you? Because you should be able to explain why you are something in your own words, not rely on talking points and not rely on canned speeches. And that's what, and so to some people, I'd say that wonder about, they have some of these biases. I would invite them to go up to Wisconsin this summer. Go up to State Highway 21 by Oshkosh and take that west and go to the next city that's on there, and then take it up to Plainfield and talk with the people there too. And when you go there, you're gonna find a lot of people that like to do water sports, that like to ride their motorcycles around, that like to enjoy nature, that like to do everything that you do. And but what happens is what they'll tell you when they really trust you is they'll say, we really agree with certain things, but we're afraid to really tell you some issues that you're going to have with this, because if you do, we're afraid we're going to have these radicals come up and try to shut our business down. Because some people I talked with last during the election, they had a Trump sign in the yard, and when I talked with them like that, they said, they said, we're glad you understand this. How are they treating you in South Wisconsin? But they could tell he's Republican. I said, well, there are times that I have to watch myself. I have to watch how I speak, because if I speak out too loudly, I feel I will have certain radical groups from the left try to come after me and smother me for saying or believing what I believe. I said, oh boy, I said, well, so I said, in a way, it's a refresher to come up here for a little bit during the summer. And then they told us, they said, we can't put this Trump sign in business, because if we do, we're going to get tomatoes thrown at us or anything else. And, folks, it's one thing, to have different political views, but, making people feel that they're going to feel retaliation or threats. No, that's not the American way. That is not the American way. So put a stop to it. I'll only say it once, put a stop to it. And groups that don't put a stop to it, don't ask me for your help. Don't ask me for your support. You won't get it. So now the last part what I'd like to talk about is I started to look at different things regarding computer science education. And now this is a Uno R3 made by Arduino. I'm not a representative of Arduino. I've just bought it because I'm interested in doing prototyping. And this is you can see the board, and this is the LED. What I did is I made it two separate circuits. One that's controlled simply by a bus that turns on the green light, and another one that's controlled by an NPN transistor that turns on the green light, but will allow a bigger current to flow through. So when you turn it on, it goes. Let's see. Let me plug it in, and we can take a look. I'll show you what I mean. Let's plug this thing in, and it plugs into the USB port. There we go. And you can see the green light goes on for 1 second, and the red light comes on for 4 seconds when the green light's off. You can see, whoops, do it again. Now, the thing I like about with the Uno R3, and also I bought another one, Hideko. I need to order a small cable to work on my computer. But what I like about these guys is that basically it gives me a chance to play around prototyping. It's something that I haven't been able to do since I was in college, and I think this is another great way how to teach computer science, because sometimes just programming code is not enough. It's nice to get your hands dirty under the hood, open up the hood, change oil, change the spark plugs, and work on a board like this. And this is what I did in my senior year. This was one of my best computer science classes. Professor Ghostberg was great. He let us choose any project we wanted to do for our senior project. Another thing about Professor Ghostberg, which I liked, is which some students may not like nowadays, is Professor Ghostberg was from the old school. So when we took one of Professor Ghostberg's tests, many people think, well, okay, you take a test, and you get a 90, that's an A, 80 is a B, 70 is a C, 60 is a D, and under 40s an F. Well, what happened? Professor Ghostberg was actually he actually wanted us to know what it was like living off campus and working off campus as engineers. So he gave us the off-campus test, as I call it. But here's what the off-campus test: you had a range from 0 to 100. Okay, and like many of us, we thought we knew our stuff, and so we were expecting A's. When we come back to Monday, well, I'm glad to say that basically 3 of you got A's, some of you got B's. And then we got test back. It was like, what? I got 62. What'd you get? I got 55. I got 45. I'm gonna fail. I'm gonna lose my. And he said, no, don't panic. Don't panic. He says, I gave you real world problems because when you're in the real world, it's not the same. Let's see when we get where to put it. It's not the same as studying the book. On the book, you're expected to know how to do all the book examples, but when you're in the real world, you're actually adding pages to the back of the book with real world examples that haven't been thought of. So you are going to fail, and be prepared to fail. Accept failure, because that builds character, that builds humility, and that shows that you're human. And so what happened was, when we had his test, he would grade on the curve, but he also did that to sort of make us humble and get rid of the ego, because in in STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics, sometimes people get a big ego. Like, I say, well, I know how to do this coding, so I'm better than this person who works at Wendy's, or I'm better than this person that works at the grocery store. No, not really. The two things those two people have is, they have a reputation of coming to work every day, coming on time every day, doing a job, and even doing a job on difficult days when it's very hard to do a job. And when you have an ego that you still think you live on campus, guess what? As soon as you get off campus, if you don't realize you can learn a lot from those people working at a grocery store and those people who are serving your food, you're going to have a hard time for the first 10 years in your life. Learn to realize that you're part of we're all part of the same herd. We drink from the same trough, as my great grandfather used to say. And this has been Ideas with Diana for April 13th, 2013. Let me know what you think. I prefer to receive comments on Twitter at Diana1A. Thank you again for listening, and keep an open mind. Read banned books. Don't let people tell you what news you can't watch.